And then our last speaker for today is Janet Blake, who is Head of Global CSR at British Telecom. Now, some of you might have heard a presentation by her. There she comes. Hello. I was hoping you were going to walk through the door on cue. Janet is Head of Global CSR for British Telecom, and the other day, I think on Wednesday, she gave us a broad overview of some of the issues that they've faced and how they've met some of their challenges. And now she's actually going to show us some of the nitty-gritty about integrating CSR into IT projects.
Okay,
thank you, Janet.
Thanks very much.
Let's just get you set up here.
I'll get you going.
Yeah. Thank you. It should have been that one.
Looks like me.
Presentation. There you go. Good. So there's about 15 minutes and then we'll there we go. And then we'll have about 10 minutes for questions.
Okay.
10-15 minutes for
That's
questions.
great. Okay, thanks very much, and hi everyone. What I was intending to do actually today, I've slightly changed my thinking on, and that's as a result of kind of hearing through discussions that there's been an awful lot of information in the last few days, and you're probably at information overload point on the Friday. So what I'm going to suggest, if you feel this is going to work for you, is to share with you a small amount of input around current issues that I see within the IT industry. So a little bit of input to stimulate your thinking, but actually to then give you some choices around what kind of topics we pick up and talk around. I've got a range of things which I'll mention in a moment as options, but I'm open to actually talk around anything that's kind of top of your agenda at the moment, so we can explore it together. So as I go through the input, start to think about what type of issues are going to be of interest to you, what you'd like to get out of it, and then we'll pick up on those as we go through. Can I make one request of you first up, though? It would be really helpful for me just to have a very quick show of hands in terms of what kind of organisations you represent. So could you just kind of raise your arm if you're from a corporate organisation? Okay. From an NGO? And from a government body? Okay, so we've probably got mostly corporates with a smattering of the other two areas represented. Okay, that's really helpful, thank you. And one final point before I get into the meat of this, my kind of thinking of what I'm suggesting as your takeout from this session, aside of the sort of stimulating debate and the sharing of ideas, and I hope that I can involve you in that sharing, is to leave you with some thoughts around what the complexities of IT may be in your organisation. So I'm going to be asking you at the very end just to kind of pull out perhaps one or two key messages that you've heard through the next 40 minutes that you'd like to take back and think about in a bit more detail in your own company. So without further ado, let me make a start. The input that I'm going to focus on is just a little bit of kind of big picture stuff around the world around us and how it's changing, and what kind of business opportunities and challenges that brings for IT. I've got a few examples here, but as I say, we can dip into some other examples too. So just to get our thinking started, some of the observations that I think are real in terms of the world around us, we're seeing a lot of changes in the business environment that are impacting on IT, both as an industry, but also as a function within your organisations. And I guess there are a range of things like a lot of strong brands entering new marketplaces, customers and citizens demanding ever higher service levels, and organisations having to cope with challenges of a global marketplace and a 24/7 society. Our expectations are increasing year on year, if not month on month, in terms of what we expect of IT in every form. Just to share with you a couple of quick thoughts about the impact that's had on my organisation, British Telecom, that's really thrown us into a huge programme of change. So that kind of world outside has a very immediate effect on IT and communications companies. underpinned by technology exploitation, but it shifted a lot of the boundaries, if you like, between what you may know as traditional information technology companies and what we may know as telecommunications. And for me, that's what really ICT means, information and communications technology, really bringing together sort of networked connectivity in its widest possible definition. Just a quick reflection of a couple of examples of customers, and again I'm using BT because clearly that's the industry I know best. You may remember that video I showed you on Wednesday of what we call the digital networked economy. Now that's kind of the way in which in an ICT environment we tend to talk about the challenges that the complexities bring. But just a couple of examples here. Unilever is one of our biggest customers. They've got around 234,000 people in over 100 countries. Huge organisation. And one of the key challenges for them in an IT sense is to try and rationalise, synergise and transform their IT and telecoms activities, both to drive out as much cost as they possibly can, drive in as much efficiency, but actually to use it to try and transform their own organisation. I'll come back to that in a little bit more detail later. So they see it as a transformation opportunity, not just a service. The NHS is the National Health Service in the UK, which is a similar example, but one that I'm sure you can relate to in your own situation. And this is where we're working with the NHS to completely modernise the service of patients' records. So I don't know whether it's the same here in Australia, but in the UK at the moment, you're registered with the general practitioner, your own doctor, who's got probably a manual record and probably their own computerised record of what drugs and sort of medical history you've had. But what happens if you have to go into the emergency department of the hospital in the opposite end of the country? Currently, that emergency doctor cannot access your patient's records, so he's working relatively blind. And what we're working with the NHS here is to bring together all of that information in one system. Now, great idea, got to be good for everyone, but think about some of the complexities that brings for IT in terms of privacy, data records, access to those records, all the kind of security and virus issues of holding that data, but also there's an awful lot of data on each one person who should have access to that. Can it be misused and abused? Is there a risk that insurance companies control information centrally, get an awful lot of access to population information, which they may use perhaps in a way that we wouldn't wish them to? So it starts to help your thinking around what the risks are of pulling information into a connected world. One other slide just to again help your thinking. Transactions we're always seeing becoming more instant, security is a key issue, data needs to be stored safely, and collaboration is very easy around data, that kind of patient record sharing that I was mentioning. Those are a few of the things which we're seeing as outcomes. We've talked about connectivity and convergence. These are driving economies on a global basis, so we're getting a very shift of how money and value is generated. Information and applications coming much closer to the point of use. Benefits from IT are changing in terms of, for instance, organisations that know a lot more about their customers because they can pull data from various sources to build that picture. And that networked IT environment, which is shifting a lot of the power base, you could say, for future economies and societies. That little diagram, which I hope you can see at the bottom there, I think is quite interesting, just to sort of get your head around some of the speed and change levels that have gone on. If you work from the left-hand side, in the sort of 1780s approximately, you had what we've defined here as the first wave of the sort of water, textile and iron revolution, a lot of the sort of raw material changes that were going on at that point, driving economies and societies. That shifted in the mid-1800s much more into what we know as the industrial age. Then it moved into a third wave of significant change around electricity, chemicals, combustion engine technology, into electronics, petrochemicals, aviation, more recently in the mid-1950s. And now if you look at where we are currently, it's in that fifth wave, which is around the digital network, software, new media opportunities. And each wave builds on the last. And in that sense, the power of each wave is growing. But if you also look at the very bottom line there of how quickly that change is happening, you get a sense of the impending build and speed of change that's going on in society. And if we've just sort of said probably 30 years is around about the frame of the sort of the current change that we're in, going up to, best guess, 2020-ish, before the next wave of mega technology change is likely to come about. So it just really sort of shake your minds in terms of what's coming to us as the key drivers around IT and where the complexities start. What I'd like to do now is get you thinking about some of the opportunities. Actually, I'm not going to give you the answers, I'm going to ask you to give me some views. So having heard that kind of input, that kind of change, any thoughts, any views around what opportunities that may throw up for IT, either IT in your own organisations or IT as an industry? Any early thoughts?
I guess that IT can play a role in terms of trying to bring developing worlds closer to developed worlds.
Yep, sort of connecting those societies, absolutely.
I feel that the amount of air travel that we do is still insane. We should all be video conferencing.
Yep.
And is there a way that IT can fulfill the role of face-to-face interactions and sort of elevate conversations, as Rob mentioned? It still hasn't got there yet.
That's a really interesting point, and I completely agree it hasn't got there yet. My kind of sense is, for what it's worth, that the technology's there, but the behaviour hasn't caught up yet. And we probably all know from our own individual experience of web conferencing, it kind of, you need to do it a few times before you work out how it's best, in the relationship piece that fits around it. So absolutely. Any other opportunities?
IT giving the ability to create a true view of the status of the environment.
Okay. Is that in terms of being able to track and sort of gather data?
Yep.
Is that how you're meaning? Yep. Yep.
Also just thinking, is there a role for IT in understanding more about how our information flows are connected to also mechanisms monitoring our other flows of electricity and water and resource flows and how, maybe telemetering for homes or maybe the IT companies will be monitoring the flows of data and goods into our homes.
Absolutely. And in that respect, it's got more information potential, hasn't it, which can help decision-making or judgments be made.
True, but then do you think there's a level above that where we've got this information overload now, and is there going to be a new emerging field in sort of reconciling it to be digestible to people who are increasingly being asked, I think, to make more decisions as individuals?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that at the end of the day we're all humans, we can only take on so much information and we have to have it in digestible chunks. Another point.
The great opportunity is there for small business to compete on a global basis.
Yeah.
If you can expand globally for a fraction of the cost.
Yeah. That's a really good point. If you think about an internet site, how does your customer know how big you are as an organisation? It's all about how you position yourself, so it's an opportunity but maybe also a risk to make sure that you engage with your customers in the right way. Point at the back.
The interactivity of IT, being able to
Yeah.
Just
Yeah. And that's really important in terms of engaging and making inclusive different communities, for instance. Okay. The list goes on. I've just pulled out a few here in terms of things which came as top of mind to me when I was drawing up these slides, but all of your points are absolutely valid. I guess one point of reflection is that what you see as opportunities will depend on partly on your own kind of background and personal experience of IT, but also about where you see your company's perspective or your organisation's perspective of IT being. And again, very top level view, that historically my thinking is that IT has been seen as a cost to the organisation, whereas actually going forward there's a mindset shift happening around, well, actually we can transform our organisation if we think more inspirationally around how we use IT. What about challenges? What about the negatives or risks, whatever you choose to call it, of IT?
I think just mainly in terms of what you access through the internet.
Yeah.
How do you distill that knowledge down to something that's responsible?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the making it make sense for you rather than just having working that's there. Okay.
I think one of the really fundamental ones is that if you look at what makes nature work, it's the essence of diversity that it has.
Yeah.
And what scares me is that the information flows that we're now seeing have the potential to take away from diversity. Because we all know the same stuff, we all get to share the same stuff, we all get to see the same messages, and I'm not sure that's good. It's making us far too homogenous.
Yeah. And I guess there's an interesting counter side which says that each of us would interpret it in a different way, perhaps, dependent on our own culture and background. But yes, it's sort of more of a blanket approach to communications, for instance, isn't it? Okay.
I guess the obvious follow-on from that is information overload and managing the amount of email you get.
Yes. I think you can all personally resonate with that.
I suppose my feeling is to follow up from the point you mentioned earlier with NHS, that collecting this information is good, but who it's good for changes. Okay, it might be good for the patient in some cases, but you're also handing over a lot of power to the information controller.
And that's a really, really good point, and perhaps one that we might choose to come back to, because that's actually usually the risk that comes up first when I ask this question. It's kind of thinking about, well, what does Big Brother know about me? In this case, the NHS. They've got an awful lot of information, and how does that make me feel about the situation? Okay, some great ideas there. Again, the list goes on. These are just a few. A lot of them overlap with points that you've made. I guess in looking at any risks and opportunities, there's a macro level, isn't there, around sort of society and the environment. There's a corporate view around what does that mean for an IT company, and there's also a very individual view around what it means, for me as a member of society. So that's just a few thoughts to get us started. I'm actually going to skip these next few slides because what I'd like to try and do is get into the meat of some of the issues and give you those choices around what you'd like to go into. Some of the, I'll just click on through as I talk here, some of the key topics that I hear coming up on a very regular basis and that you might want to think about whether we focus in on. Offshoring and the transfer of data around the world is one of the hot topics that I guess has been a hot topic for some time, but remains there and probably will increase as we start to see more and more change and growth of developing countries. I actually read a McKinsey report recently that said that in India, for instance, which is kind of the traditional centre of offshoring for call centres, there are 280,000 employees currently based in call centre activities. By 2008, it's going to be, I've just forgotten the figure here, 2.2 million people will be involved in call centre activities and IT support. And 2008 isn't that far away. Quite frightening. So the geography of jobs, insourcing, outsourcing, offshoring, whatever you choose to mention it, struck me as one of the topics we might want to go into today. Another thought, which again I see as a key trend, is around partnerships and acquisitions. And this is IT companies that are taking one another over, telcos that are taking over IT companies. But also, if you're an organisation with a lot of data on your customers and you are taken over by another organisation that can merge that data together, immediately they have a far bigger picture of their customer base. And worst case, it might be an insurance company buying up a private medical insurance company. And all of a sudden they've got data about your medical records, your kind of living and working and home situation, those sorts of issues. And the final one I put is local and global, which is kind of the issue around how you manage the requirements, particularly more from an IT company's point of view, of being a global operator in IT versus a local operator in IT, and some of the different cultural, legal, country differences that brings. They were just three that I thought about, but there may be a lot more that you'd like to also think through. So here comes the choice of what you'd like to go into more detail on in the next 10 minutes or so that we have. Any thoughts?
Well, I think local versus global is pretty critical for everyone here. Because what you're saying, it just occurred to me that if the next wave of mega technology is liable to hit around 2020, does that mean that anyone who has a new innovation in IT today has probably got a 5-year lifespan?
Interesting. Unless they change with the new technology that comes in. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. And I guess actually again, bearing in mind we're all individuals, those are the sorts of things that current IT workers will be thinking about, and businesses need to be thinking about building in capability on. Okay. Any other topics of key interest? And I'll see if we can merge a couple.
Well, I would think that the first one fits in sort of kind of with the third one.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, we can link the two and draw out the.
With the business challenges for IT, it seems to me that most IT departments are completely under stress in just managing to keep the business running.
Yeah.
When you mentioned about IT area leading business into new areas, actually forming new possibilities, any of your viewpoints on how that can happen?
Okay, excellent. Well, I think we can probably nicely merge those under the sort of the core heading of geography of jobs and the changes that brings globally and locally. Okay, well let's go into that. You'll have to bear with me. I'm going to skip around slides now to fit your requirements. Maybe again as a kind of a trigger for our thinking around in and outsourcing, and let me just explain the difference that I mean there. Insourcing is where a company takes over the IT services of another. So, for instance, British Telecom BT, what we tend to do in a Unilever example is we will take over the entirety of the IT services activity for Unilever, and we'll bring all of the people that work for Unilever onto BT's payroll. So it's a full insourcing situation, but it's an outsourcing situation for Unilever. And it's important to recognise that there are different considerations from either side of the fence. You may not think that's automatically the case, but clearly Unilever need to be thinking about different issues as they're moving or choosing to move their employees across to us versus the ones that we think about when we choose to work with them. I'll perhaps just pick on a few and maybe we can just think around what the implications of those would be. There's quite a lot here around the impact on employees of that kind of situation. And just drawing on the point of local versus global, clearly you may have employees who are based in one place as an organisation shift takes place, but to realise the synergies of combining IT, if you like, under a new outsourced operator, it may be necessary for those people's jobs to move. Because you're combining, for instance, 5 different call centres into one central call centre that may not just support Unilever in that example, but may actually support a different company as well. So that may bring a lot of issues around employee satisfaction, around working conditions, around sort of freedom of association, that's union and works council recognition, those sorts of issues which immediately hit the employee base of both organisations. So it's quite an immediate issue, and those very often are the issues that tend to get, the publicity and hit the headlines as the employees suddenly think, wow, I've just been swallowed up, I don't like the feel of this. And it's that kind of impact that could immediately hit. You wouldn't necessarily think of that as an IT issue, but it's a direct fallout perhaps of an IT change. Has anyone experienced that kind of shift within their own organisation? Yeah? Are you from Interface? Sorry, I saw you talking earlier. I deduced you were. That's something you've done?
Yeah, something that we've done is we've made acquisitions and received the impact of that.
Yeah.
Trying to merge cultures and something which is a very tough thing to do.
And what's your experience of the sort of the success factors in doing that?
Minimal.
Right.
I think our experience would be that we need to be extremely respectful of the companies that you're getting involved with, and that you need to understand what you should leave alone.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a really valid point. Choosing the points that you address, but recognising, if you like, the individuality perhaps of the business that has come in. Yeah, that's a very valid point. Any other experiences, positive or negative?
When you have a holding company and the holding company dictates a certain software will be run by the entire organisation, and the organisation will need to adjust its business processes to fit that piece of software, the Oracle SAP.
Yes, good example.
That, in a way, completely transforms the potential to transform the working the whole practice of the organisation.
But do you think, in most cases, that the managers or the project directors, whoever's leading that change, have already understood the impact? No.
Just friction after friction.
I think, certainly from what I see, that's probably one of the biggest problem areas. IT, in inverted commas, is still seen as a product, as something that you go and buy. It's a piece of hardware. It's got the software system running on it, but still companies are not good enough around thinking about the sort of relationship changes, the behavioural changes, the organisational changes that need to follow from that change. And that's probably the biggest area of complexity, single complexity in that kind of situation. Now it's an opportunity for companies like mine, in a way, because what we try and do is take away that pain from our customers. But what it does also do is it says we've got to be really good at that project management to make it work, or you get a really bad experience from the customer viewpoint. And it's a big mindset and behavioural change thing, and that's not typically the capability that an IT company has. So there is quite a significant shift of skill sets going on also within the IT industry to meet that requirement. Can I just pick up that point around consumer preference? I'll put location, names and accents. I'm thinking here about, most of us have had a negative experience with call centres, as well as hopefully positive ones. But when you call up and you can't understand the accent of the person that you're speaking to, maybe that they give a sort of an Australian, American or English name, even though it's quite clear it's a call centre in India. What's your impression of that as a customer when you go through?
honest answer? Hang on.
You hang up straight on. Okay, yeah. You're not alone in that. Absolutely. Otherwise, what other reactions?
It's fraud.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. Because what you see in the advert for whichever company it is that you're phoning, say your insurance company, you expect to have the brand promise on that company, don't you, when you phone up? But if you're faced with something that doesn't fit to that brand, you feel that it's a fraudulent intervention or interaction.
I kind of feel sorry for the calls and employees. And I kind of ask them about what's it like and what happened, how they got flooding there and so on, and try and make it more personal for them.
Yeah. And that's great, and that's kind of how to get the best out of the setup, isn't it?
Isn't that leading us to the automatically disdain for different accents on the phone?
Yep.
You're assuming someone from India might be a guy around the corner.
Does it depend on what the brand is? I mean, if it's an international brand, the only experience I've had is with HP.
Right.
So I don't expect them to be they're not an Australian brand, so I don't expect it to be something else.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in what would be first response to that.
I guess I've just had some experiences where companies that are put themselves forward offering a local service, localised service, localised facilities, they bring you into the brand on that basis.
Yeah. Okay.
And then you are faced with something which is clearly not that way. It's got nothing to do with accents or anything. It's about being positioned in a certain way and then not being true to that.
Yeah, that's fair. It's also like money being stolen from the community.
Right. Can you expand on that?
It's with the outsourcing, for instance, I need to think it's just announced that they're going to relocate 1,000 jobs to India. Call something like IT. Makes me think that if I'm paying money for NZ, it's not staying. I'm not supporting local communities.
Right. That is a really interesting point, and actually, if I can just develop that one step further, because, and I'm sharing with you here some of our BT experience in this, and we've had good and bad experience. That exact point is what came out on, this is kind of an amalgam of various different headlines that hit the press around the time of us setting up some call centres in India. We have about 2,000 jobs there at the moment. But essentially both the union view and the media view was around, what's your view of the world? And the instinctive one is a British company creates 2,000 new jobs on the positive side, but is that good news or bad news? But they're in India. Is that good news or bad news? And then you've got the dilemma of, well, is it good to take sort of wealth, economic advancement, etc., to a developing country? Most of us would say yes, wouldn't we? But equally, you've got that kind of national instinctive view that says, actually, we want to protect our own society too. And how do you manage that dilemma as an IT organisation in terms of the sort of the external view, the publicity piece that sits around it, but also internally in terms of the people, the 2,000 people who will need to be redeployed into other jobs in the UK in our example. And that's a really difficult situation to manage. So I think in terms of coming back to the title of today's discussion, the complexities, this kind of issue, it's maybe not new, it's been around for a few years now, but it's increasing in speed, it's increasing in industries that it affects, it's increasing in numbers, and although India has been, I guess, historically the last few years the key focus area for offshoring of jobs, what our research is telling us is next up are coming sort of Central and Eastern European countries, China, so we know it's going to be happening, and that kind of learning and that complexity is going to continue. Just in case you're interested, I know it came up yesterday in the panel interview, Linda asked me specifically a question around this. Because it's so integral to our CSR policy, BT chose to undertake or commission an external organisation called Sustainability to really do a drains up on what good CSR in offshoring and outsourcing looks like. And it kind of picks up the issue that the gentleman at the back raised in terms of global versus local jobs. It also touches on some of the areas around the stakeholder groups in those different countries. If you're interested in reading a bit more, that website at the bottom is where you can download a summary of it. But the title of the report was Good Migrations, something to do with beach boys somewhere along the line, I think. And there were 12 key learning points that came out of it, and they're listed up there. The overriding message, interestingly, was that this is, from any IT company's viewpoint, this is inevitable. It's part of modern life, globalisation, it's going to happen. But the criticality on CSR is about how well you manage the CSR aspects, particularly around trust. That's the real hot button. And you can, as an IT organisation, create differentiation in the marketplace for yourself if you get it right. So it's kind of an opportunity, but also a big challenge. So I think we've picked up a few of the issues that were starting to bubble up as we took the debate there earlier. Actually, I'm just going to skip onwards to another slide which I just put together in terms of a couple of the issues that you also mentioned were around sort of the country changes and sort of the transfer arrangements. This is just a short list of some of the issues that we've seen in the acquisition and partnership space. By partnership I mean where we're actually working with a long-term partner globally. A whole host of different issues, but top of the list comes due diligence and the extent to which you understand the risks before you choose to do business. I don't know how many of your organisations have acquired or grown by acquisition. Is that something that you've done, or have you grown inorganically in the main? Interfaces? Both, okay. And are these the kind of things, are there any surprises that you see on this list? Which kind of tells me that it's cross-industry in terms of the issue, regardless of which sort of aspect of IT change you're coming at from, it's the same issues that essentially are there. Okay. I've got half an eye on the time, so let me just switch finally onto the local and global. Some of this overlaps, but I'd like to call out the managing CSR cross-border, because that's kind of, it touches on this issue of, the local presence you have in country, if you're supporting an organisation or you're doing IT yourself, versus if you are putting yourself in the hands, say, of a global IT company that's going to take that over for you, or in the sense that you may be advertising through the internet into countries which you haven't hitherto done, receiving custom and transacting with those countries, which immediately is cross-border. So let's just reflect on that for a moment. What do you see as the key issues around that cross-border working?
Key issue for me, and I've had the experience just recently, and that is driving a company globally with the use of IT. And you have a problem rises with someone across the other side of the globe, and it represents a violation of the values. The traditional thing is you should solve it face to face, but these days, you can't spend your time hopping on a plane to go solve a problem there. And people are still uncomfortable today trying to address these issues over the telephone and through email, and it's a difficult problem.
And it's a very human problem, isn't it, in terms even of language and time zones and those kind of issues. Yeah, that's a very valid point. Any other big implications that you've experienced or you see?
I guess just culture. I mean, we've been talking about the cultural differences. I mean, what people have expectations of CSR is very, very different. And I think what Cameron was saying, sort of just an interpretation of your corporate values in perhaps Latin America or North America, even though it's the same values as far as what those interpretations are, is challenging.
Yeah.
We did a internal global survey 5 years ago around values, country by country, and frontline people basically in Thailand. And in most of the Western countries, people were talking about the love, trust, commitment, sorts of values that they were seeing as being most important from a working perspective. And it's interesting that when it came to Thailand, it was having enough to eat and drink. It's the most important thing that they valued, and just between the eyes that was so fundamentally different. So obviously we need to be conscious, so conscious of that.
Absolutely. I think that's a very powerful example, because you can't automatically assume that the issues are going to be either the same over time or the same country to country. Okay. The other angle that I was going to mention, which kind of came up indirectly through what we were talking about, is this whole piece about privacy of information, where you push that information and data cross-border, because you've got different legal frameworks, you've got different standards of data protection from country to country. And just on a really simplistic level, if you're ordering something over the internet, how do you know which country that information is going to end up in, and therefore what protection your credit card data gets from the customer that is processing your invoice? You don't, do you? Really? You do it on trust. So it comes right back into the trust of the brand and these sorts of issues being absolutely key. But there is a kind of second angle on it, which is around the onus, the CSR onus and complexity from an IT provider point of view of what that puts onto a company like mine going forward. Because if we are pulling that data together, then we have a responsibility to manage it securely. And you may remember back to the video I showed yesterday, the day before yesterday, Visa is one of our key customers. And I don't know how many of you are Visa customers, but clearly absolutely up there in any Visa transaction is your ability to be able to trust that when you're putting your card through, that information is being securely transmitted right the way back to source. Now, on the one hand, that's Visa who have the brand for that activity, but clearly we're one of the organisations that sits behind it in terms of having to manage really, really tightly that data to make sure that it's securely handled all the way through. So our obligation extends through Visa to you. You may not know that BT sits behind some of that, but very clearly if there was a breach of security in any way, shape or form, you sure as hell would know within a very short time. So that for us in terms of an IT company is one of the big complexities going forward. I don't know whether you're interested, we can either sort of close now for questions, but I was going to leave you with a couple of thoughts just to kind of run through your mind around further extensions of that privacy issue, if you'd be interested. In terms of some of the future technologies that we kind of know at one level are going on, but we may not have thought about the repercussions on. Would you be interested to just reflect quickly on that? If you think about, I'm going to lump these into three major bubbles. One is around surveillance and tracking. If you think about barcodes in your supermarket, various different sort of ways in which products are tracked. What's starting to happen now is that that's being extended into what we call radio frequency ID tags. You may know it in the context of criminals that are out on probation. But that can go actually, in terms of technology, one stage further that companies can put these RFID tags into products, into clothes, into mobile phones, and can therefore actually track what an individual's movement is, what their behaviours are, these types of things. The technology allows it to happen. Another example, cameras, CCTV cameras, you see them in every shopping centre. We kind of take it for granted that that information is securely looked after, but there's a big privacy issue around what happens to that data and who uses it. Spyware and cookies on the internet. There's a lot of ability to track where somebody goes on the internet. Are we comfortable that that kind of information is shared? Second kind of bubble area is around data management. We've talked around some of these, but something called federation of data, which is a nice term for the kind of scope creep on what you do with data. And that example we were talking about, insurance company combining kind of insurance data with medical data and other information about a particular individual. That's what we call scope creep. You haven't necessarily devised that information to be bolted together, but if it is bolted, the whole picture of what a company knows about us changes.
Just interrupt you. I've noticed myself and a customer with a bank here in Australia who've started selling health insurance, and I think in addition to getting some more money, that's perhaps another second motivation is to be the sort of point of entry for both these fields of information.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of what I've called scope creep. And I think for me the big issue is, well, how quick are countries to get the legislation, the framework, the principles in place that give that protection? My kind of sense is that technology is speeding up and the technology is ahead of the legal framework. So that kind of whole privacy area is a complexity. The final kind of bubble area is identification, authentication. If you think about DNA databasing, national ID cards, swipe cards, kind of fingerprinting, iris scanning, these types of things, very personal data areas for an individual. Again, that technologically wise is absolutely available and can be implemented, but have we actually got the right level of protection and legal frameworks in place to be able to do it ethically? So they're just a few tasters of some of the things that I see as the up-and-coming issues, really moving on from the offshoring type debate, more into the complexities of IT in the future. And just one final point to make before I ask you to reflect on your own sort of hot topic is, are IT companies, historically, do they have the capabilities to deal with these new complexities that are coming in? And what kind of demands does that make on IT companies to shift ahead of the time? So just to close up before we open for questions, anyone want to share the key topics that have come to their mind from that debate, of the implications for your own organisations?
I was struck by the comment that was made by this gentleman here a while back that IT companies and departments exist under an incredible amount of stress. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that. Is that growing a whole host of dysfunctional organisations?
It's an interesting one because it reflects back partly to what I mentioned earlier around my sense that the capability requirement of IT functions and IT companies is changing. IT in many cases is seen as a cost, and that's, I think, maybe where you get the sense that resources are being shrunk because it's a bottom line cost issue. But actually in reality, it should be an area where we're saying to make IT work properly, we need all the other capabilities that fit around it. The project management, the behavioural change, the relationship builds that are needed to make IT in its reduced form, if that's the choice, work more effectively. Now, my sense is most organisations haven't really got that yet, and they're just into the cost-saving piece, which is maybe what you're experiencing.
Yeah, with I work at some mega corporations, so kettles and toasters,
Okay.
all those sort of products, and I manage all the IT for product design. So I'm trying to.
So you're right in there.
I'm not. The company isn't looking at CSR. I'm looking
Right.
on an individual basis.
Okay.
And so I'm looking at there's movements towards eco PLM, product lifecycle management,
Right.
and to try and do that from an IT perspective. And there's normally the software is packaged to try and add on. It's very difficult. So I'm trying to search for people that have done it before, industry standards, to share information about products all the way through the life cycle, but not for a constant reinvention for a company that's pioneering, but to be able to pull resources. And I'm struggling to find where to get a handhold to start getting the information to do that.
And that, of course, puts pressure back on you to deliver at the same time as making that kind of change. Yeah.
It seems that the lack of information, companies have to completely reinvent internally and pioneer themselves.
I think that's, and again, my sense is you're not alone in that. That's what a lot of organisations are going through. It's kind of, to my mind, it's something of a dilemma that we're not good at sharing that kind of data. We don't actually share very openly the kind of learning from organisation to organisation, which is a tremendous wasted opportunity. So maybe that's a niche in the market, perhaps. Okay.
I've got a general question which probably doesn't relate to any of this. What does BT's scenario planners say beyond 2020? What's our next revolution?
Well, it's interesting. The answer is partly they won't actually define it, because in their view it's too long a timescale at this stage to be able to really, with assertion, say this is how it's going to look. I guess the trend there is saying that there's going to be an increased speed of change, and those technologies are going to be exacerbating faster and faster. The one area that there's a lot of debate, certainly in Europe at the moment, is around this whole sort of ID, radio frequency ID technology and its application, in the sense of changing society through sort of ID systems in their various and widest sense. So certainly our sort of research laboratories are working around that whole activity area and that whole technology. But in a generic sense, I have to say, at the moment there's very little concrete coming out. So that kind of brings us to close, I guess, of the official bit. We've about 5 minutes to go. Does anyone want to raise any other question areas maybe that we haven't covered?
Sorry, I'm not comfortable with your concept that outsourcing 2,000 jobs to India is corporately social responsibility. The reason I'm saying that is, can you assure me that these people in India are getting the same pay rate as the 2,000 people were getting? It seems to me it's profiteering, which doesn't seem to match my concept of CSR.
Can I just clarify what I was saying, which was that offshoring, outsourcing, whatever you choose to call it, is to my mind, an aspect of modern business that's going to happen. It's happening around us. And as an IT company, we have a choice whether to take part or not. The commercial drivers are so extreme that we almost can't say no. But what we see is that CSR is an enabler to doing it right, and doing it the right way. So by applying some of those points that we talked about earlier, that's a way in which we can differentiate ourselves from other organisations on a commercial footing, but also comply with, if you like, the CSR responsible outsourcing that says, we look at these things, we do it right. So that's kind of the mindset that I meant to put over, and apologies if I didn't make that clear.
It's just me, I have a thing against outsourcing. I believe it's immoral, it's profiteering, and my personal view of CSR is obviously personal, and I believe that the company basically to it wouldn't outsource because you're basically profiteering from lower wage, not you, I'm not referring to it.
No, generically.
Profiteering, which is just it's anathema to what perception of CSR is different.
Yeah. It's a constant dilemma, and it's a constant debate that goes around. I guess from my if I put a simplistic view onto it, and think about our situation in India, for instance, the alternative of not having outsourced to India would have been keeping those 2,000 positions in our case in the UK, which would have been more costly for the business, wouldn't have brought that economy, that input, and sort of all the economic benefits to India. You can look at it that way, absolutely, but is it better not to do it?
I don't want to get morality, but I'm just saying I find it difficult to marry CSR to the concept of outsourcing. When you look at British telecom, you expect that it would have a loyalty to the Brits. There's a certain brand name loyalty that we were discussing earlier, which is what we call fraudulent, but seems to be missing the concepts associated with CSR.
The other conundrum, I guess, that any global organisation like ours has is when you're a global company, what's offshoring? Because, we serve customers in India, so we need Hindi-speaking operators to service our customers in India.
Well, this takes one more point with this concept. What was the actual infrastructure cost to set call center in India when you already had it in place in Britain?
Honest answer, I don't know. I know that from a business case perspective, it costed in. So it must have made business sense to do it, or we wouldn't have done it. But in terms of what that cost was, I couldn't tell you.
I had a sort of few run-ins with telemarketers was I got a call one night and somebody said to me, can I save you hundreds of dollars on your phone bill? So I think the guy said go for it. It was clearly an Indian accent. And he said to me, okay, could you hold on a second, please? I said, okay. Next thing, an Australian accent came onto the phone. And the guy said to me, could I call you back? So it's just getting more and more bizarre at the time. Put down the phone immediately, the phone rang. And I said, okay, we're going to save you, can I tell you about your phone bills? And I said to him, look, whatever. So I suppose the guy said to me, explain to me what happened there. He said, no, we get the Indian call center to make the contact. And all that they do is get somebody to agree to listen to somebody in Australia. It's then cheaper for them to then phone you back in Australia on an Australian line and talk about it. So,
amazing.
I didn't go with the product.
So I can understand what Cameron's saying. I read a comment just recently when the conference was told that whether we like it or not, the world of physical manufacturing is going to be owned by China, and digital processing is going to be owned by India, and what's left for the rest of the world is innovation, new ideas.
Yep.
So
many true words.
That's the world we're living in.
18 out of the last 20 centuries, India and China have been the two major economies in the world that will be again in the century. There's nothing we can do about it, which is why we should look very closely at outsourcing.
James, another 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah, okay. Any final questions? Yeah.
To make an IT company or an IT department lead the organisation in terms of CSR, where does the IT department look for information about how to do that? I spoke to Lord Hastings about this, and he said, look on the Business and the Community website in the UK. Is there any other pointers you could give me this last month of how to find information about to leverage CSR, IT and CSR?
Just giving that some thought. The only other route you could go is looking at something like the Dow Jones, which I know has been mentioned today. It's a global index, but it's sectorised. So you could actually look at the IT sector, identifying who the top players are in that sector, and then really look to identify, what's worked for them. It's actually one of the better websites in terms of these indices. They don't always share all the results, so you have to piece it together. But that was one of the better ones in terms of showing on, I think, 10 or 12 different ratings how that top IT company had scored. and it may not be the same company that wins every individual sub-rating to have got to the top. So it's quite interesting to look at how, what elements they see as most important, where they put the majority of their resource and focus. And that can quite often give you an idea of what the levers are. But I'll have to think about anything else, any other routes that I can come up with as ideas.
And one other thing is the possibility of open sourcing Entropy International. Just go onto the website and there's nothing to download or information to get.
No. We're, I think I mentioned on Wednesday, it's a relatively new thing still for us, and what we're doing is kind of marketing it on a fairly focused basis. So we're actually talking initially to our customers to say, look, is this something that you can use and can we help you use it? Really sort of make sure it's fully tested, fully operational and fully functional before we open it more widely into the open market. And it will be aimed, I guess, initially at sort of large corporates as opposed to sort of middle-sized organisations. So, but I would expect in the next sort of 6-9 months that we'll be opening it out. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.